I started this channel about a year ago, and one of the more interesting things that's happened during that time is the Star King AM0184. And I believe I actually had the first review of it here on YouTube, so it's been interesting to see it go from complete obscurity to being covered by much larger channels. And at the same time, it was interesting to see Star King realize that a cheap HiBeat movement was unique to the marketplace, and they've now created a bunch of HiBeat models in a very short amount of time. And at the same time, it's been interesting to see Star King go from just being on AliExpress to GearBest, and now on Amazon here in the US. So it was a pleasant surprise when the Star King store on Amazon contacted me and asked if I would like a watch to review before the holidays. So I picked the one that I thought was the most interesting, and they asked if they could send along an entry-level quartz at the same time. So this is the first of a two-parter, where today I'm going to cover the HiBeat AM0276. And with a little bit of luck, I'll have the quartz BM1007 out in a few days. Now, if you remember the 184 review, the 276 is somewhat similar to that. It's a HiBeat and sapphire, but this one I think is a little more interesting. Now, just in case you're watching this and have no idea what I'm talking about when I say HiBeat, it's in regard to the rate the movement is oscillating. A standard movement usually runs at 21,600 beats per hour, or 6 beats a second, and a HiBeat is 28,800 beats per hour, or 8 beats a second. But the big question is, why should you care? Well, it's not only a difference you can hear, but one you can see as the second hand looks just a little bit smoother. But it's not all about aesthetics. Theoretically, a HiBeat movement has the ability to be more accurate. The only downside is that since the movement is running faster, there is more wear in the same period of time. But enough about that, let's take a closer look here. The case is a highly polished stainless steel. It's a very rounded, minimal design. Similar, but not quite the same as the AM0184. It tapers as it goes from front to back, and has a little bit more detail work here on the upper part of the case before it hits the crystal. Overall, the finishing is pretty good, especially for the price, even as you head to the back, where the case back is also nicely done. But instead of the typical screw-down case back, it's secured by 4 tiny screws. The lugs also extend down, just slightly lower than the case back, propping the watch up just a little bit as it lays flat. With regard to dimension, the watch is listed as 41 millimeters, but I found it to be just over 40 without the crown. Width, it's closer to 43. Lug to lug is a little compact here at 46.5. And height-wise, it's sitting right around 11 millimeters, which is not bad for an auto. With 20 millimeter lug width, you also have plenty of options for straps. It also weighs a nice solid 116 grams with its bracelet, but it only has 50 meters of water resistance, which for a dress watch is expected. The crown is at the 3, and it's a little small, but appropriate size for a dress watch. It's a decent texture, and it is signed with the Star King logo. Both crystals are listed as sapphire and do pass a water drop test, with the one in the front being a nice, large, flat sapphire. Below that you have the dial, which I originally thought was a more reflective flat black, but it's actually more of a slate gray. It all depends on the lighting. Indoors it will look mostly black, but in sunlight you can really see its true colors, which is one thing I really do like about it. Also, interestingly, is up close on a macro level, it looks like the texture is more of a matte, yet overall the design itself is rather reflective, so that might all be due to the sapphire. Otherwise, the design is rather simple. The main dial is made up of metallic bars as applied indicators, followed by a painted sub-dial in the lower right. It's sort of an open dial with indicators in white. The sub-dial is a little more casual than the rest of the design. The hands are minimalist silver sticks, and for something a little bit different, the date is at the 9. But other than the Star King name, that's pretty much it here. Overall, I like the design. It's a simple, classic, and elegant layout. Not to mention, you can never go wrong with a sub-second hand. Now the date window is a little small, and the Star King text does look a little off. Perhaps it needs to be applied or a different color, or maybe just the logo. But what I liked most about the dial is that gray color. Not only is it a little more unique, but I think that combined with the more casual design of the sub-second hand, let this watch be a little more versatile, where I think it looks fine in just a casual setting with jeans and a polo. And at a height of 11 millimeters, it really shouldn't interfere too much with a long sleeve shirt or jacket. Now, one other interesting thing, and a minor point against this watch, is that the caseback references a different model. It's not a huge deal, but it might cause some confusion later on when you're trying to remember what model this actually is. Now, the movement looks very similar to the one in the 184, with a similar plain finishing. And again, one of the things I really like is the use of a blue screw holding on the rotor, as it lines up perfectly with the wheel of the Star King logo. Now, accuracy-wise, this watch did disappoint, gaining about 20 seconds a day. It's not horrible, but there is room for improvement. But it should be easy to regulate, just don't lose any of those small screws. Finally, we get to the bracelet, which I was actually surprised at how much I liked it. Normally, I don't like a Milanese chain bracelet, usually because they're more like this one. Smaller links which make it feel more like delicate jewelry, where this one has a much larger gauge links and is stiffer. It's more tool-like, if you will. It's not quite like a shark mesh bracelet, but it's somewhere in between. But that difference made me like it a lot. Not to mention I appreciate the double-sided clasp. I also really like how it wears. The 40-ish millimeter dial really gives it some great wrist presence with that gray dial. The shorter lugs, which also stick down, let the watch hug my wrist nicely. One thing I don't like is how the excess of the bracelet is on the inside next to my wrist, but that's just how these things work. All in all, I really like this watch for the price. Although the more I've worn it, the more I've noticed that with its case and dial, it really could use some anti-reflective coating. But at this price, that's asking a lot. Now, price-wise, it's currently sitting around $60, but it can fluctuate, so just be aware. And with regard to value, I think it's a decent price. Now, with Chinese watches at this price, you can get some with a Miyota movement. But the interesting thing here is that Star King HiBeat. Although it is worth noting that the movement is potentially a negative as well as a positive. Unlike a Miyota 8200, it is a rather unknown quantity in regards to long-term reliability. But at these prices, I think it's worth taking the risk. Now, if you're comparing it to the Star King AM0184, here you have a better case, a better bracelet, not to mention what I think is a more interesting dial. So I think it is worth a small premium. Now, if this particular design isn't to your liking, Star King has a bunch of new HiBeat autos to pick from, and I'll most likely have another one in the future. But in the meantime, let me know what you think about the AM0276, and specifically the gray dial. Would a flat black have been better? And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me.